Hi, how's everybody doing? Y'all good?
Great.
Cool. Alright, so I'm gonna read like 5 or 6 poems and then I kinda just wanna do like Q&A. Is that cool with everybody?
Yeah.
Cool. In the Netflix trailer, Obama says, "I don't fit in anywhere," while Anthony Hamilton pulls a burning city out of his mouth. And the song is not about anything in particular, just melody and wound. Pain is true enough for a man to pass for a whole country, and he is young and named Barry then. And I think of how my parents flinch sometimes when I say my name, how it sits opaque as a kidney stone. Jagged sugars, a slow waltz with what is forbidden. Barry dances with white girls and glances uncomfortably with all the black boys, and we all know the white girl is a phase, a counterbalance to the basketball, which is either a very obtuse Atlas reference or a reminder that Barry does black stuff too. And I used to think wherever a white girl could see me is where I was from. I did not say love. I did say my name was David, which is not untrue, and the song is throbbing by now. My soul is on fire, my soul is on fire, my soul is on fire, my soul is on fire. David dances near the white girls and plays basketball. David hasn't sung since the last white girl he wanted. David, body of static, the electric glazing the TV, clingy and inconvenient down to the touch. The song is winding down now, scabbing over into an exhausted piano. Barry smokes a cigarette. David was never alive. Anthony Hamilton reaches into the back of his mouth, pries the gristle of a repossessed house from between 2 molars, and his dark neighbor with calluses asks, "Is this where you're from?" Barry says, "We are Americans." So of course I say, "Yes." Alright, this is a Philly poem. So throughout the book, my voice is starting to come back, fantastic. So throughout the book, there's this series of poems that are written in the format of research abstracts. So this one's called "The Spook Who Sat by the Once Bombed City, Psychological Explorations of Ancestral Memory Through the Lens of Racial Battle Trauma." Abstract. In this poem, we shall examine the figure of the token as a doorway into a theory of ancestral memory, namely, the collective unconsciousness of African American history. Thus, this poem is concerned with the question of whether what has been done can ever be undone, perhaps still more appropriately, whether what has been done has ever stopped happening. Concurrently, this is a poem that preoccupies itself with the question of what constitutes the beginning of ancestral memory. History implicates the hands, the ongoing question of whom they belong to, while a linguistic lens favors a tongue starved thin with retreat. For the purposes of this poem, let us favor the tongue. If we imagine ancestral memory as a museum with only entrances, then everything that has ever wished you dead might still be inside. Thus, the skull is a house filled with rusted knives. Where language intersects with all of this has fascinating physiological implications. Let us revisit the token in college, attempting to say no and feeling dehydrated with the effort of it. If we presume the token's college is near Philadelphia, he might learn about the MOVE bombing and smell smoke everywhere. This matrix of possibilities lends itself well to the question of whether trauma and pain are inherent and by extension inherently linked. Simplified, the token sits in his first Black Studies course at the edge of understanding that Black excellence is a failed form of Teflon, and rubs the exhausted tendons of his knees and wonders how long he has had to be faster than even the skin implies. He might answer, always, perhaps, decades. Alternatively, he might have forgotten how to speak altogether. Y'all like Kendrick Lamar?
Yes.
Yeah, me too. Variation on a theme of genetics. After Kendrick Lamar. In the dregs of August, I watched the birds sprint like black folk, and surely this is in my DNA. The loudness of living amongst the living breaks one bird loose into armada of wings in my DNA. Where I'm from is a question I can only answer my parents as capillaries, and thus I know only a bruise's worth of my origin. I have one country and one executioner, they're the same in my DNA. Tradition dictates the men in my family die of nothing but themselves, and so I am a fugitive percussion, child of bad knees. I sprint an emaciated hum until I'm a threat to my DNA. Beneath my skin, I keep 23 versions of the same drowned map. I am a library of redundancies, bird lost amongst birds. I was built in and for obscurity. All the darkness is practical in my DNA. The body is a subtle phalanx. by which I mean I am never not thinking about dying. Every child being born is also being sent to their death. I calculate the mercies in my DNA each night as if I could bend pinion into a frail sickle, slake every thirsting palm with a blade. There's a joke that nothing makes black people run faster than other black people running. So tell me something, only if you know it. Why are we running if not because the loyalty is in our DNA, native as an apocalypse? Do the birds know their blades look like blades against even a threatless sky? What is patience but a luxury for the hunted? The appeasement of a mosquito, just a docile format of bloodshed. Tell me, when destruction gonna be our fate? Surrender is as expensive as it is unjustifiable. I am trying to vanquish a hereditary sadness. I am trying to say I was born with my mother's face and my father's skin, who says I have the face of the future, named so, I think, for being the last obscurity he will see before he dies. Just my luck to be born a few years before the end of the world. My parents draw nearer the end of their running. We are listening for the tragedy that will escort them out of this life, leaving me holding only the blood. Whoever's in the back, there's seats up front if you want to come in. I don't know. On the night I consider coming out to my parents, I am afraid of something I am but have never named. My tongue is a refuge for secrets. How does one still fear banishment if they were born in exile? There's blood on the ground. No time remains, so I'll lay it flat. I am black and Dominican and bisexual. There, if I die now, you'll have a hint for which God to petition. Sometimes I look at a man and my hands are already digging into the small country of his back. In this way, the body is a distraction from what can make the body just a memory. My lips could bring a man's blood to the surface. My mother raised a curse and gave it her face. I am afraid to belong to another thing, to become still more no man's land. I am a trench. Nobody comes to clear the dead. Somewhere, my mother is gripping a rosary to pray for men who look like me. Somewhere, my mother is praying for me. I do not want to give her something else to worry about. I am quiet. I bury no one. Blood is drying beneath my nails. I do not know which me it belongs to. I think everybody has a year they never really leave. If song is the yoke of grief, then a year is not dissimilar to a bruise. I come from a thread of tragic men mourning other tragic men. There are men I cannot touch when I need to, and all of them are related to me. I am saying that once I was small, and this is how I learned my father was going to die someday. We were in the parking lot outside of Blockbuster. It was raining because I remember it raining, because I am always ready to conjure something to hide my father's grief in. It must have been 2004 because every station was playing Dance with My Father on repeat. Luther Vandross had a stroke a month before, and even the static wept. And there, to my left, my father crying and my hands too small to fetch even a single tear. He asked me a question that was not his question. Why does the music have to have words at all? He means that to say the dead will only ever make them dead again. Outside, the rain arced out, the widowed strands of a web silver and perpetually falling. I wanted to strip the words from the air, let the piano repeat until grief exhausts itself. I know only a thin and selfish magic. Beneath every mention of my father is the only truth he has ever wanted from me. He is going to die and my grief will be unremarkable. He is going to die and he told me so. He is going to die and this makes him not dissimilar to the constraints of a song. Every season dies eventually. This is what makes it a season. I ask too much. I return and return to the space before he could die. I hammer shrinking fists against my eyes, insistent, ugly as the fate of the rain. The author is often mistaken for Obama's long-lost son. All over the news it is said he is once in a generation. I understand this to mean there can only be one of us, and he already is, and often things are lost for a reason. Me and all my margin-heavy blood loose, a pack of scarlet hounds howling at the edge of acceptable. I want to be what he is, but I'm just barely over the fact I can be seen at all, and the resemblance is marginal. A question of the right brilliance, a question of the hypothetical, a question of if I had a son, he would probably not look like me either. The only math I'm good at is counting what ain't mine. My tongue, my hands, faces that can be traded for other things I can't have, the good silver creeping at the edge of my scalp. I steady plot the course of history by the lengths of presidencies, sundial dictating a shadow. All I can remember about time is what man wanted me dead then. I hear the 80s, and a hand ribboned with blue veins raptures the choir of hair running the length of my calves, supple meat gone sour in the freezer, infertile country lousy with stray mutts, my fugitive reflection dirtying the anthem. You look just like him. So clean, so smart. It's midnight in this light. He could be your father. Where your people's from. Y'all might have split a ghost way back. Just a spitting image, like that poor boy. The night makes cousins of us all. Obama wants to be clear about his legacy. Let me be clear as a water stain on glass, nearly window but not bulletproof. I want some things to always be constant. Legacy is muzzled by history with good reason. Let me be clearer still. Persistent film of dew on dying grass, opacity is a form of treason. I got envelopes with a thin gold, and sometimes my own dead face unspools, and men in suits rush in because it would be a tragedy if I remembered I was someone who could die. Let me be clear. My blood necessitates repetition. I am gone. I am gone. I am gone. I am grateful that the room was round, or I would have dented it with my screams. Gratitude is a kind of violence. I say thank you, and that yawns into a bomb. Everything I do with a grace which has only ever been described as bestial. A gazelle or a swan, a precise kind of fugitive. When I was born, history stuttered, and I lacquer my palms with the silence. I think it's impossible not to miss it. Despite everything, I give white people hope. Nothing will ever demand me to be this merciless again. Let's get like 3 more off. Mercy, mercy him. The first time I realized Marvin Gaye was dead was the first time I realized my father wasn't joking when he said, I could kill you. Please, forgive him for what he believes his rage demands. Forgive him as I have failed to. I know Marvin like I know my father, gazing up in half laughter, venom in the breeze. If I must die, and I must, let him be the gun. A death is only like a firework in how it can become a mistake in the space between rooms. When Marvin died, his brother blamed fireworks. A man can die from how his country celebrates. A man can die from another man. When he wrapped his hands around my throat, I wore his calluses like pearls. Through the second punch, asked no mercy except God to spare the man who was killing me. Forgive me. I had forgotten it was the beginning of July. My vision populated with false stars, what could be misremembered as fireworks. Tonka for the 4th of July. I will spend the day surviving, which is the most un-American use of my body, since I spat loose a bullet and laughed. All right, last poem, and then we can get into this young Q&A. Sound good, y'all?
Absolutely.
Cool. Sad Nigga Manifesto, after Terrence Hayes. Some songs can only be the orange echo of a western sky. Something is always spilling and the heat mops it up before the stain even has a chance to name itself. I was born exhausted of fleeing. I am coming to you live from a Negro spiritual born with dust in his veins and little else. Melody of heat lightning threading the space between desert and stars. Let's say what's real. I'm a sad nigga come from a long line of sad niggas. I am coming to you live from a generation of thirst. Everyone I know is trying to fit their calluses around the throat of grief. It seems like it has come to this. It seems like it has only ever been this. What is abandoned and trying to leave sadness as if it is the lonely opera of a daylit storm. My family, I am coming to you live from straddling a noteless tragedy. I am wandering through a harmony built from bloodlines and humidity and the tenderness only fugitives can claim. It took a precise sequence of sins to make me, and I am giving none of them back. Only a mouth can cure a mouth. A man is singing in the distance, and he too is a sad nigga come from a lineage of the unforgiven. I want to find him. I want to manifest destiny, my own sadness. Thirst to shining thirst. Shame to shining shame. If I find him, we will hum as if we are bullets discovering the labor of bullets. Heat lightning unspooling amethyst. Until death do I part from the life I have tarnished with my living. Thank you. Yo, thank you so much for coming out. Y'all, folks who are in the back, if y'all want, there's some spaces up front. Yeah, so like, who has questions? Shoot, what's up, Vic?
So how do you condition your hair?
Well, this is dry right now, but I use argan oil mostly, like them argan oil conditioners.
Write that down. Pose use argan oil.
Use that almond oil to seal it in. Cool. Other questions? What up, man?
Could you explain like the thought process behind picking the cover?
Yeah. So what I knew that I wanted from the moment. Actually, there's an easier way to start this. You're gonna see me do that a lot. I like to start stories multiple times. So I am right now a Master of Fine Arts candidate down at the University of Mississippi. It's Oxford, Mississippi, so it's like North Mississippi. And I'm working with a phenomenal poet. Her name is Amy Nezuka Matatu. She's the recent author of most recently the author of Oceanic, fantastic book of poems. If you're looking for like tenderness and like just the general idea of like how vast like the wonders of our world are, right? And like she's somebody who teaches with that kind of thing in mind. And I think that that's important because it explains why she's spent and dedicated so much time and energy to try and make sure that I had every possible advantage that I could, right? So Amy, a little bit before the book got picked up when neither of us knew what was gonna happen, right, just gave me the advice that book contracts come at you fast. And you should always have a little folder somewhere that's just full of art that you like, things that you would like to see as a book cover. And it has to be something that you're willing to look at for the rest of your life because you're gonna have to schlep the fucking things yourself. So off of that, you know, being the person that I am, you give me like a very small task and I turn it into a massive project. massive and like very dedicated project. So I like went to go like find, I was like, I'm gonna find like 20 black visual artists that I love and or fuck with. We're gonna figure it out. I'm just gonna take it out because I literally have nothing to lose in that process, right? Yeah. So I had this stack, and like I came across Jeff Manning's work, and he's from and he lives here in Philly, and he's the one who actually ended up eventually doing the cover. So then I got the call from Nicole Seeley, who's the executive director of Cave Canem, which is the organization for one of the best organizations in the country for Black poets, and they're the ones who sponsor this prize that makes the book. So she gives me the call, and I was like, oh, okay. And Amy wasn't bullshitting. Book contracts do come at you fast. Suddenly you have to have like all the bookstores that you want this at, all the awards that you want this at. You have to have cover art ideas or they're gonna do it for you. And that sounds like death to me. Like, I'm sure they have good taste, but I like my taste. So I was like, okay. So I narrowed it down to like about like 9 artists, and I decided I wanted somebody who was Black, and I wanted somebody who was either from Philly or Chicago, because those are the places that I owe the most to out of all the places that I've ever lived, right? Mm-hmm. Like, this is artistically, this is my hometown. Like, everything that made me into the poet and writer that I am, like, happened right here in this city. So I knew that it had to be either that or like my original hometown, right? Like, I'm a Midwest nigga to the core. So I reached out to Jeff and 2 other artists, and Jeff hit me back and was like, yo, this sounds awesome. If you want it, here's the price tag. And I was like, bet, son. And I was like prepared to go into like pit and be like, this is what it is. Like, and they were like, oh, okay. There was no fight. I was not prepared for that. Had all this extra energy. I had to do another mile on the treadmill just get it out. But that is the process by which like I arrive at the cover itself. And I think that when we think about like, this is a story really in this book about like a painful methods towards flight, right? And I think that when we think about that, when we think about Icarus, when we think about recontextualization, to me, Icarus was always like a very black story, right? I think that's part of like, I'm a little bit off your topic now, but just to like kind of like wrap it up, I think that part of why the book has such a deep interest and allegiance with like Greek myths is because those were kind of like the first myths that I was exposed to. And I grew up kind of thinking that I must be a myth, right? And the myths afforded me a certain kind of possibility because I mean, within this book alone, just like the Greek myths that are referenced, there is somebody who was at sea for like, how long is Odysseus out? He's like 20 years. 20 years, right? He's at sea for 20 years because he was at war trying to get into an impenetrable city which they permeated with a fake horse. There's a boy whose father designed a maze for a child of 2 human beings that came out with the head of a bull, the body of a man, and the legs of a goat, and he designed an intraversable maze for this beast to kind of like wander around in and shit. And then they decided they wanted out of the contract, so they both made a pair of wax wings and they flew, and Icarus flew too close to the sun and falls into the ocean, right? Narcissus falls in love with himself. Like he literally just sees his face for the first time and he just stays there until he eventually drowns. All of these are remarkable stories that I saw get to be like played out on television, but there was nothing in the world that could imply that there could be a little half black, half Dominican kid from Logan Square. There was nothing to say that kind of person could exist. So myths allowed me a certain kind of possibility that I was like, okay, well, if I can if people can be made to believe this, then I can make them believe that I'm here too. Mm-hmm. So this image to me speaks to that so much. So that was kind of the process of picking the cover. What is
that boy good.
Fucking love you, Vic. You are like the illest literary hype man.
Is accurate.
Cool. Who else got questions? What's up?
Hi. You got some favorite, preferably joyful, generative prompts for young people?
Actually, I was just talking about this yesterday. Do y'all read Martina Espada at all?
Not yet.
Word. Okay, so small homework assignment for folks in the room who don't. There's a poem by the poet Martina Espada, that's spelled E-S-P-A-D-A. It's called Imagine the Angels of Bread. Actually, hold up. Would y'all mind if I share that with you? It's not a very long poem.
Yeah, do your thing.
My phone is dead. Could somebody look it up? I cut this shit off and then I realized immediately.
What's the name of the poem?
I got it.
You want me to look it up?
Also, what am I going to have some treasure? Jesus, I thought I knew him. Right?
I can hear y'all talking shit about androids.
No person.
You have an Android still?
Yes.
You want a book tour? Do that.
Nigga, this shit got wild battery life. Let me alone.
Don't let them shame you.
Except right now.
Except for right now.
It's dead.
I mean, it's dead because I turned it off.
My phone alive.
It's dead because I turned it off. Anyway,
That sounds backwards. Turn
the
up.
poem is called Imagine the Angels of Bread by Martina Espada. This is the year that squatters evict landlords, gazing like admirals from the rail of the roof deck, or levitating hands in praise of steam in the shower. This is the year that shawled refugees deport judges who stare at the floor and their swollen feet as files are stamped in with their destination. This is the year that police revolvers, stove hot, blister the fingers of raging cops and nightsticks splinter in their palms. This is the year that dark-skinned men lynched a century ago return to sip coffee quietly with the apologizing descendants of their executioners. This is the year that those who swim the border's undertow and shiver in boxcars are greeted with trumpets and drums at the first railroad crossing on the other side. This is the year that the hands pulling tomatoes from the vine uproot the deed to the earth that sprouts the vine. The hands canning tomatoes are named in the will that owns the bedlam of the cannery. This is the year that the eyes stinging from the poison that purifies toilets awaken at last to the sight of a rooster loud hillside. Pilgrimage of immigrant birth. This is the year that cockroaches become extinct, that no doctor finds a roach embedded in the ear of an infant. This is the year that the food stamps of adolescent mothers are auctioned like gold doubloons, and no coin is given to buy machetes for the next bouquet of severed heads in a coffee plantation country. If the abolition of slave manacles began as a vision of hands without manacles, then this is the year. If the shutdown of extermination camps began as imagination of a land without barbed wire or the crematorium, then this is the year. If every rebellion begins with the idea that conquerors on horseback are not many-legged gods, that they too drown if plunged in the river, then this is the year. So may every humiliated mouth, teeth like desecrated headstones, fill with the angels of bread. So I share that one because that poem is fire, right? But also because I was thinking about that image at the beginning of the video for All Right, where Kendrick has, it's just like a car full of him and his niggas, and they'd be palanquined across by a bunch of cops. And when I look at that image, I think of Imagine the Angels of Bread, right? So the prompt is that we read that and we look at that image. I want us to talk a little bit. If I'm teaching that classroom, I want us to talk a little bit about what ekphrastic means. Just like that's basically any poem that's based off another like art form. So it can be an image, a performance, a song. Most of the time, historically, it's been like still images, portraitures, but it can be anything, right? And so we can find ways to like take that and make that thing our own. And then I want the students to go and come back next workshop, and they have to have an image that they have to have an image that makes them feel most free, that makes them feel like this is the year. And I want them to write a poem, an ekphrastic based off of that. Like, if you see this image, then what year is it? What is going to happen now? I'd probably also pair that with, I think it's the Isley Brothers who sang Wake Up Everybody.
Curtis Mayfield.
Curtis Mayfield.
And the group.
Yeah, Wake Up Everybody. I think Wake Up Everybody, Imagine the Angels of Bread, and that image, I think all are doing kind of the same work. Because when we're doing that, we're really asking our students to engage in a kind of world building, right? That's what we're. That's what.
Teddy Pendergrass. That was Harold Melvin and Blue Notes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, my bad. I'm feverish. But yeah, that would be my my prompt. I think that was something that that's something that we can never have enough of, right? Is like young people like really being given space to imagine, not just like dictate, which is also important, but not the same work. Is that it? Who else has questions?
So, what would you say would be like the most influential part of Philadelphia culture to like create you as a better writer? To conjure a better writer out of you.
I think that Philly has some of the best like organic accountability structures of any place I've ever lived. I was thinking, because right now, like I live my life surrounded by a bunch of like very well-meaning white people. And I bring that up because a lot of them are trying to like find ways to like communicate with the Black Mississippians on campus, and they're like, well, we need to find ways to like let them know like about like accountability structures. I was like, these things are actually already built into our language. We just don't express them the exact same way. Like me and Miriam were kind of talking about this a little bit on the way over here. But I think about the fact that like one of the most Philly things that I've ever heard anybody say, and I say it, hear it all the time, is that's my nigga, but what he do, right? Like this idea of like I can be loyal to this person, I can love this person, I can also appreciate this person has like a capacity for harm, right? And like how are we going to like move forward? How are we going to move forward with that? How are we going to do that? Are y'all still able to hear me in the back? I know that my voice is fading a little bit. I just want to make sure. Cool. But yeah, so I mean, I think the thing is that like, so there's that particular part of the spectrum of like how like Philly's accountability structures like made me a better writer, because it meant that I was part of a community that I felt accountable to. I felt was accountable to me in turn, right? And what that also meant like wasn't just about capacity for harm and like reclamation and remuneration, but also about the fact that like frankly I was surrounded by some of the best artists on the planet. So if I wanted to like feel good about being here, I was like, I'm gonna have to keep stepping it up and like whatever it is I was able to, and whatever it is that I gained was a result of like specifically like the queer Black femmes that were surrounding me. Like, you know, this city, like, so that was something that was huge for me. Like I've missed that particular aspect desperately ever since I left. And every time I come back, it's like nothing's changed on that particular front, which is good. So yeah, I think that's the biggest part. Was that Janice? But yeah, does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Just checking, man. Okay, cool. Who else got questions? What's up, bro?
So, in terms of, and you can take this as the project as a whole or the individual pieces, but how important was like visualizing or envisioning what you were writing in a greater scheme of the entire project? Was it something where you were just writing a bunch of poems and like, okay, these fit together to make this thing, or was it like intentional, like from the jump? And how do you go about writing with that in mind?
Or that's a good ass question. So I'm trying to figure out the best like entrance into this question, because it's a really good one. I think that it's a book that kind of like tells us that like the story of how it kind of came together is a series of like me writing series, and then something kind of wild happening at the end of one of those series, and it would change the trajectory of the book, right? Like, I think that it's never lost on me that like this started as like a chapbook that I wrote in like the summer of 2015, and back then it was like a wildly different book. Like there was almost nothing in there about the way that my Black life was being lived, only my imagery for it being taken, right? And I think that like then you start to see these kind of like biracial identity poems coming in, and like a couple months later there's like you can see like a little bit of the formalism start to creep in. I'm thinking about like across like the like something like 98 drafts of this book that have existed prior to this. So like I'm not gonna walk through the whole timeline because I think that's like a little self-indulgent, but what I mean to say is that like there was a framework, but the framework kept kind of shifting, and so I would kind of just like let myself like kind of like sit inside of an obsession for a while. And because I think we've talked about this at least a little bit, but just for everybody here, my writing process, I've been told, is very weird in that I come up with titles first. Like generally like my titles, like the reason they're so damn long is that like I have an idea of like, okay, where I want to use this title as kind of like an antechamber to the poem. Now you have all the necessary information. Let's have some fun, right? And I'll come up with a title, and I will put all of those titles inside of a folder. Like I make a Word doc, and like that's each individual poem idea, right, is a title. And I'll put all of those into a folder on my desktop that's cleverly titled The Vault. And then I don't look at them for like a week. And if I'm still thinking about the image, then I know that I have a poem and not just something that I thought was fascinating. So then I come back on that. But like if it's like if I'm thinking about like there were many more Frank Ocean poems that made this book, right? But I had like 8, 9, 10 of like the docs just ready to rock. But then only one of them was Frank Ocean site number 268, which I was like, oh, okay, cool. Now like I found through this particular form poem a means by which to talk about this like emotionally abusive relationship that I got caught up in, right? And that changes the trajectory of the book, because then from there we're thinking about we're not just thinking about music, we're not even just thinking about bisexuality. When we're thinking about Frank Ocean, we're also thinking about like what tenderness can cost us, right? And I think that that's something that like once you can start to think about that, like that shifted the trajectory of the manuscript to me. It's just like a whole process of like how that kind of goes. And then the funny thing is I'm thinking about like the follow-up to that, because I think you were also asking a little bit about like ordering, right? Yeah, the ordering was also really fast. It was also kind of a weird, interesting process, because the version that Vibey accepted was a version that I'd cut like 2/3 of it. Because I kind of like went a little ham. Because I was like, one night I was just like, oh, this is garbage. I read a bunch of shit. And then Vibey was like, this won the prize and it needs to be a book. And I was like, okay, maybe we should probably pull some of those back out. Let's see what's happening here. And so it was interesting kind of like seeing those fusions between like what has managed to stay, what's managed to do its job, what I think is still contributing, and having interesting conversations with things that like poems that I had written in the intermediate period that I was like, there's no way that anyone be even remotely interested in this book without Icarus, without 1,000 Cardinals, without Portrait of My Father, Sisters. None of those were in the book when it got picked up. So I'm just like, how do I merge these two things? And I think that none of it works if Icarus and 1,000 Cardinals aren't the first two poems in the book, because they're the ones that are most frightening to me. But I think that they're frightening to me because I was raised in an environment basically where like to communicate what are the actual stakes of your living here, like what are the stakes of your loneliness, was considered really not okay. You know, it's not even necessarily like the traditional like black, actually no, in a certain way it is, like just to like, you know, like black children in a white educational setting, like you're supposed to be seen, not heard. And so like to actually be like, nah, like if I stay lonely like this, I'm not going to survive. Like to say that directly to somebody, that's not a good thing. That's not something that they react well to. And so to put those poems first, like it's really interesting, like kind of, because I was in a workshop at the time that the book got picked up, where we submitted like poems in sequence. Like, so I set the first 10 pages and everybody was like, this suicide poem that you have on like the 3rd page, you gotta take this shit and move it somewhere else. Like, this is too much vulnerability too soon. And I was so fascinated by that. But I don't think that any of the other conversations in the book work otherwise, because otherwise you're like, oh, okay, I mean, like, you know, he's black and he's in a white school, you know, like, that's lonely. But I was like, no, like, this should, like, almost cost me my life. Now, like, read the rest of this, but, like, know that, like, all of this culminates here. But yeah, so that was, like, kind of like, I went in and out of, like, the direct status of your question, but I hope that it answered it. Denise?
So, Vibey, can you talk a little bit about how Vibey helped you put this book together? Less about, like, I think Vibey's amazing, but for us to, like, learn what questions a good mentor will ask you during this process. Were there questions that surprised you or made you rethink the book? I know you talked a little bit about that, but particularly because this came through Cave Canem, I wanted to, like, talk about more of the process being mentored in that way and putting this collection together.
Right. Yeah, that's a good question. Just for everybody's context, when Denise says Vibey, she's talking about Vibey Francis, who was the judge for the Cave Canem Prize the year that she picked me. We got to read together like 2 days ago. Vibey's the GOAT. So I think that, like,
Could you explain what GOAT means?
That's when I thought I had done the work.
Vibey is in fact the greatest of all time, to my eye. So I think that it's interesting because just like, because of things that were going on in V's life, we didn't get to have as much of like a back and forth editorial relationship with this. But the good thing is that, like, I think this is also something that speaks to like the strength of mentorship, though, is that the things that she had asked me 2 years ago were still like incredibly like rich guiding questions that the more and more I sat with them, the more they were able to help me interact with the work, if that makes any sense. So like Vibey taught me at the Callaloo 2016 workshop. Like Callaloo like is this journal dedicated to black art and black artists. It has been since like the late 1960s. And they also have a workshop series that's on hiatus right now, but that like arguably was like 2 of the best weeks of my life. And so that poem that I read in the middle of the set, on the night I considered coming out to my parents, was written on the second day that Vibey gave us a prompt. And the only prompt that Vibey gave us was to do something in poems that we don't normally do. And mine was that I don't generally use punctuation. I don't write prose poems. And I had a interesting but kind of silly reason for why that was. It was really just that like I came into poetry at a time when like my academic work was really kind of like a huge trigger for me. And so anytime a line went past like the middle of the page, it kind of reminded me of the homework that I wasn't doing because I was trying to emotionally process like the pressure of being in this space, right? And so literally that was the only prompt, was that she was just like, use a literary device you don't normally use. And so I wrote a prose poem, but the thing was that Vibey had already made such an important space for me to be brave that I was able to write that I was bisexual for the first time in my entire life. So there's that, right? And she reads this poem and she looks at it and she's like, word. And she told me word. So she and I sat down and we had a one-on-one meeting, everybody gets a one-on-one meeting with Vibey at the end of the first week that day. And then you get your meeting with Greg in the second week. And Vibey asked me why I hadn't applied to Canto Mundo, which is a prominent Latinx Writers Fellowship. And at this point, you know, like Vibey now knows that I'm bisexual. My parents don't even know I'm bisexual. So really there's no space or incentive for me to lie. So I told her the truth. I was like, I don't think that I'm gonna fit in. I don't think I'm gonna fit. And I'm scared about that. And she looks at me and she says, do you know who you are? I said, yes. And she said, no, you don't.
That's Vibey.
No, you don't. Julian, you have no idea. You are sitting at the intersection of so much. You are right at the precipice by the strength of your work, but also by the strength of what has brought you to the work, to like be positioned to have a great voice in the great national conversation of American literature. You are a vanguard. You may never fit anywhere again. Are you prepared to act like it? So, under that circumstance, like, to understand that you're like part of a vanguard, right? Like, to think about that, I was like, okay, wait. If that is what I'm carrying into, this book, then I know that I have something important to say. Because that's really where I was just gonna keep coming back to, is that I was just like, I've so often been told like, your life is not interesting, your life is not interesting, your life is not interesting, unless I'm asking about it. And then when you explain it to me, then I'm not interested because it's not the answer that I was looking for. So your life is not interesting, right? And so like, how do I think about like how the musicality of this book can like fit into like one long kind of memoirist song? All of that stems back to that meeting, because Vibey told me like, no, you have something very important to say and you need to say it or I will find somebody who can. So that was one of Vibey's big impacts on the book. I also thought a lot about like the way she's used her frontispieces, which is just like a poem that goes right before the table of contents in a book. So I was thinking a lot about like the way that she structured Horse in the Dark, for instance, and like that's what inspired the idea to have Icarus be the first poem before you even reach the table of contents. I want you to understand the myth that we're coming from in the same way that she does with setting up the horse so that we can eventually get to Pegasus. Does that answer your question? Right. Who else has questions?
You guys have really one more question.
Pop in.
I said we guys have really one more question.
I said pop.
Oh.
Word up. Make it a good one.
Or we can do the siding.
What's up, Vic?
So,
Make it a good one. Shoot within striking distance.
what other projects and things are you working on in the future?
Word. So I kind of like set myself up. When the book got picked up, it meant that it also couldn't be my thesis. So I've been working on a book length thesis. It is not that will eventually, hopefully, someday become a second book of poems, and that's gonna be exciting because like right now I think we're like realistically I've written like four different refuses to get to the one that you have. That's kind of like just the way the books work. Is like you write like all this stuff, and then you arrive at the question that you were trying to get to the whole time, and then that means that like 18 pages is just like completely useless now. It's basically completely useless. So we're in like probably like phase 1 of that. Maybe phase 2 if we're being charitable, but probably phase 1. So I'm working on that. I have some like novel projects that I'm working on. I don't know if they're good, but I think they're cool. I think they're interesting. It lets me be funny in a way that I don't normally just generally don't do in poems. And I'm working on some like nonfiction with Kiese Lehman, who's the author of Heavy, who you should absolutely like. We're not writing it together. He's just looking at it and saying like, this is not trash. And I'm like, fantastic. I won the Pulitzer. Fantastic. You're lit. But yeah, so Key's like looking at some nonfiction of mine right now. So those are really kind of just like the projects that I'm working on. I'm just trying to read as much as humanly possible, engage new questions, engage new questions, new challenges, stuff like that. Yeah, so that's really kind of like all my creative projects. All I can do is write. Thanks for coming, y'all.
Thank you.